Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. First of all, lots of folks have asked for the return of this guest. In fact, lots of folks have demanded, to the point of almost not quite thuggery, that we hire this guest. We have.
I'm sorry about that, Jonah.
It's all right. It's all right.
How rude. How rude.
There are people who love you. That's all right.
Strange folks.
But we have, in probably the most exciting news of his entire career, made Jay Nordlinger a Dispatch contributor, which we're very exciting about. He's got other things, and he's written books about the Nobel Peace Prize, and he does all of he as Rob Long would say, he swans around Europe at all these fancy conferences. Rob Long is the only person I know who uses swan as a verb.
He's a bit of a swanner himself.
He is indeed.
Out in Hollywood and all that in New York.
It's very much a take one to know one kind of deal. And Jay Nordlinger was recently named a senior resident fellow at the Renew Democracy Initiative, which was founded by Garry Kasparov, the great Garry Kasparov, in 2017. He writes in podcasts for their publication, The Next Move. He's also the movie critic for The New Criterion. And he's got a Substack called Onward and Upward. And you can get it through the usual Substack ways, but also you can just go to his Jay's website, which is Jay Nordlinger, spelled out J-A-Y, Nordlinger.com. I think I've done enough now. So, Dr. Nordlinger.
Dr. Goldberg.
Welcome back to the Remnant.
Thank you so much. Good to be with you.
So I want to maintain a certain level of jocularity and badinage on this podcast, as you have arguably the second most euphonious podcast voice to Alan Gelzo. But we are recording on October 7th, and I figured we really should start there and just was wondering what lessons do you think you've learned, or that we've learned or unlearned in the 2 years since this happened, and as we're watching something that looks like a peace deal maybe possibly conceivably unfold?
I have nothing really except for platitudes and cliches. Eternal vigilance. It's wearying. It's unfair. People don't like it. I don't like it. There's no substitute for it. No good substitute. Eternal vigilance. And Jewish people in particular have to be on alert. People have a right, you would think, to let their guard down, to breathe easy for a while. Certainly Israel cannot afford that. And October 7th saw the worst massacre of Jews since the end of World War II. A horrific thing. It was on the 50th anniversary of the 73 war. Funny, I had just seen the movie Golda in a theater. One of the last movies I've seen in a theater, and starring Helen Mirren. And I had been thinking about that for a few days, that movie and all those events and the inquiry afterward. And on October 7th, 23, Israel was left naked unto its enemies, utterly defenseless. How is that possible? And particularly maybe on that anniversary. And presumably there will be an inquiry in the future, perhaps one that will make 73's inquiry, or the inquiry about 73, look like a picnic. But in the meanwhile, there's a war to fight and win and finish. And that brings its own problems and trauma.
So I think it's fair to say you and I have been critical of the Trump administration. It's funny, I think 6.5 or 5.5 out of the 7 wars that Donald Trump claims to have ended were not ended by him, and it's sort of really gauche lobbying for a Nobel Peace Prize.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I think it's good that presidents want a Nobel Peace Prize. All things being equal, you'd rather them want one than not want one, I guess. but you may disagree with that. But um, it's really remarkable how many people, particularly on the sort of the center left mainstream media side, I've heard now say, like I heard Andrew Mitchell, I think it was Andrew Mitchell say it the other day, if Trump pulls off this peace plan with for Gaza with this International Peace Committee or whatever it's called, he actually will deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. I'm just wondering, you wrote a book, Peace They Say, about the history of the Nobel Peace Prize. Where do you come down on all of this? It must be a little weird to be dragged into an issue that you have
It's rather nice.
trod
Yes,
so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I've it's my moment, so to speak, my 15 minutes, at least on this topic. And I've gotten several calls and emails from journalists who want to know about the prize. Almost all of them foreign, by the way, not U.S. I think the Nobel Prize is a bigger deal in other countries than it is in ours. For example, I wonder how many Americans know or care that Martin Luther King won the Nobel Peace Prize, because he's a lot bigger than that prize in our country. You know, it's almost a footnote. It's a minor detail about King for us. Yeah, I'm not sure that presidents should want to win the Nobel Peace Prize, and I'll give you my meaning. The prize is not something to be aimed for. It might be a consequence of good works, but you can desire peace, or the appearance of peace, maybe a false peace, too much. And the most stinging criticism I ever heard of the Nobel Peace Prize was made by Tony Blair, who said to George W. Bush, as Blair was going off on another round of Middle East peace negotiations, "If I win the Nobel Peace Prize, you'll know I have failed." And that was funny. That was quite a quip, and it was made in jest. But there's something true about that, and I think that Blair had the Oslo Accords in particular in mind. They turned out to be a fiasco, but they were awarded the Nobel Prize. These were accords negotiated in the committee's own city, of course, Oslo. But as for rooting against Trump and peace, or a ceasefire at least, some sort of pause in the Arab-Israeli conflict, people root against the success of their political rivals. I think it's simply human, and like a lot of things human, must be overcome.
Yeah, I'm not rooting against Trump. I would be.
Oh, I didn't imply. I'm just speaking of those of whom you spoke. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would. It would be great for this to succeed, and it's one of the few things where, even though I honestly don't think it will. It's not. I don't mean that as a particularly harsh criticism, because everything else has failed over the last 50 years. Sure. You know, so sometimes past performance is predictive of future results. I just mean, I think that even if it fails, there's a lot more upside to this than a lot of the other things that we've seen, insofar as it's demonstrated a willingness of various Muslim countries in the neighborhood and outside of it to be part of something that at least their stated position is for Hamas to disarm, and that they're putting some skin in the game. And it's incremental progress, but it's better than them saying Hamas is legitimate resistance and should be armed to the teeth. So, like, you take what you can.
You take what you can. That's right. You take what's nearest right. Yeah, I don't envy people at all who have to deal with Middle East peace and Middle East war. I don't envy them at all. It's supremely difficult, and a lot of bright minds have worked on this. Kissinger, Habib, etc., etc. It's one of the great intractable problems so far. We used to say that, remember George Will saying this, there are few intractable problems in the world. One of them is the Arab-Israeli conflict. One of them is what to do about North Korea, and also Northern Ireland. And that seems to have held for all these years, the Good Friday Agreement. Young people have to understand, when you and I were growing up, Jonah, Northern Ireland and the Troubles were a big, big deal. There was just horrible killing and endless rancor.
Yeah.
All the time. And then it vanished from our newspapers. Isn't that interesting?
It also, for people who think that I think the spillover from the Middle East is greater than any spillover we've seen since maybe World War I into our domestic politics. But the Troubles or whatever, it may seem strange to people. It created real fault lines inside the United States, politically, culturally, that you could ruin many a Thanksgiving dinner by bringing up
Well put.
Ireland when we were kids, in various
Yeah.
places.
Well
Maybe not in
put.
my family, but like it's.
Yeah.
And people seem to think. I think this is one of the reasons why it's bad for the Jews that people have goldfish memories, is because they seem to think, well, why are we only ever arguing about this one country? And it turns out, if you actually know anything about American history, we've argued about a lot of other countries. It's just like this one has endured longer than most.
Jonah, do you know this joke? I bet you knew it once upon a time. There's a man walking through Belfast late at night, and he feels a gun at his back, and the voice behind him says, "Catholic or Protestant?" The man thinks quickly. "Neither, I'm Jewish." And the voice behind him says, "I must be the luckiest Arab in all of Northern Ireland." So that's a joke redolent to the era, as they say.
All right, so this is maybe a well-placed segue on this. So Donald Trump is doing many things in domestic politics that I find very troubling. His military palooza thing last week, where Pete Hegseth did a presentation that I think you can defend it on the merits in all sorts of ways. I don't think it was necessarily a necessary event, but that's fine. There were moments where it felt like it was an infomercial where they were hawking the new MAGA grill that seals in flavor and drains out grease or something, but that's all fine. But then you had the President of the United States come on right afterwards, and after Pete Hegseth talked over and over again about how lethality was going to be America's military's calling card, saying how we should use our military we should use our cities as training grounds for our now lethal military, right?
Yeah.
You have a big fight unfolding as we speak about sending troops against the will of a governor of Oregon and also of Illinois. You have Trump repeatedly talking about the enemies within, which is, I think you and I are probably more read in on the history of that concept being super creepy and
enemies
dangerous.
of the people, all that stuff. Yeah.
And so the segue part is this:
insurrectionist judges. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry, Jonah.
The segue part is this: it seems to me that even if Donald Trump delivered a truly spectacular, epical, unprecedented victory for peace and stability in the Middle East that would warrant on the merits Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know nearly enough about the committee that you do, but it seems to me that a president doing this stuff at home is just not going to get a Nobel Peace Prize. They're not going to give a Nobel Peace Prize to a president who looks like he is going, looks to the Europeans at least, like he's going Orban plus, right? That he's turning towards autocracy here at home. They say, well, that's, it's great that you got peace in the Middle East, but we're not giving you a Nobel Peace Prize while you're doing this stuff with your own people. Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not wrong, except occasionally the Norwegian Nobel Committee is double-minded or triple-minded. You will recall that Yasser Arafat won a third of the award, and the other two-thirds were won by the two leading statesmen in Israel, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. And defending this decision, someone on the committee, or perhaps its secretary, said, "This is not an award for all-around good behavior, for being moral exemplars. It's an award for certain work done." What Alfred Nobel said in his will, written in the 1890s, was that the Peace Prize was to go to, the first criterion is fraternity between nations, for the person who has done the best or most work for fraternity between nations in the preceding year. This was the ground on which Arafat's third of that prize was defended or explained. But it would be unlikely in the extreme that Trump would win the Nobel Peace Prize. As I've been saying to some people, stranger things have happened, but not many. So I wouldn't bank. But if a U.S. president can pull off, can mediate a solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. Can you call it a crisis after all these decades? That would just be a huge event, meriting some award for sure. It's also, may I just say relatedly, that it's interesting that MAGA doesn't mind being entangled in this foreign situation. Israel is always having to defend its right to exist. Ukraine is having to defend its right to exist. It's interesting that so many people say we must have nothing to do with Ukraine, it's not in our interest, but are gung-ho on supporting Israel. There's a duality at work. And I was writing recently, Jonah, I'm told almost every day I'm told, you support Ukraine so much, you think the Ukrainian cause is so important, you think Putin is so bad, why don't you strap on a rifle and go over there and fight? Well, I'm equally supportive of Israel. No one has ever said that to me. Mm-hmm. You think Israel's so important, its cause is so just, you think Hamas is so bad, why don't you strap on a rifle? No one says that to me. I don't know what your experience has been.
Yeah, I've gotten some, why don't you admit it that you're, I mean, I've only been to Israel once, and when I got there, I was like, okay, where do I go for my back pay? Because I've been told my entire writing career that I've been in the pay of the IDF or whatever. But and we've been through a lot of that kind of blowback. My problem with the why don't you strap on a rifle and fight argument is it's like they're cosplaying from the wrong script insofar as it's a demagogic, but there's a kernel of merit to that question, that rhetorical question. If we were talking about sending American troops,
yes,
right? If you're saying, if we say, okay, we should have certainly if there's a draft, right? If you're in favor of the draft and, or if you're in favor of even sending a volunteer force to go fight somewhere, someone can, again, I think it can be done in bad faith, but there's a kernel of truth there saying, well, why are you willing to send other people to go fight for something that you're not willing to do yourself? I get that as a rhetorical maneuver. I don't know anybody on the pro-Ukraine, pro-Israel side who has been arguing for sending American troops to go fight for either.
Yes.
And so the bad faithness of to coin a phrase, of the J.D. Vance crowd, which immediately goes to this thing, you want to send, that you should go fight rather than send American boys, is based on a lie, and it drives me crazy.
Mm-hmm. Moreover, we ought to talk about the U.S. interest and what is in it and what is not. And, I believe that support of Ukraine is in the U.S. interest, and that support of Israel is also in the U.S. interest. And that really is the foreign policy argument.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. It's in our interest. And my view is that we should rhetorically always be on the side of people seeking freedom. That doesn't mean necessarily we fund, send troops, spend blood and treasure on everybody seeking freedom, but at least we provide rhetorical aid and comfort. And then if it's in our national interest, we do more than just provide rhetorical support. We maybe provide material support, political support, diplomatic support, whatever it is. And I frankly just don't understand the argument that I actually find it harder to understand the argument that supporting Ukraine isn't in our national interest than supporting Israel isn't in our national interest. I think they're both in our national interest, but like the argument for supporting Israel is not as strong to me as the argument for supporting Ukraine on purely realpolitik grounds.
Yes. In arguments for Israel, there's a lot of affinity, I would say, rather than cold interest. A lot of affinity, which I understand and, of course, share.
Right.
I wonder if I could bring this up with you, Jonah. It's been on my mind, and I was interested to know what you would say. So you and I have been consuming news about Israel and the Arab-Israeli conflict since, well, in my case, since the 1970s. I'm older than you, and I have I've covered that conflict a bit, reported on it, written stories about it, but I've consumed so much news over the decades, so many books, so on and so forth. Never have I been less sure what to believe coming out of that region. I feel very awkward about that. news out of Gaza, very hard to trust. I find I'm not as trustful of this Netanyahu government as I've been of many previous Netanyahu governments.
Mm-hmm.
So as someone who strongly backs Israel and to whom Israel is very important, I find myself a little unsettled in reading reports, what's true and what's not.
I have the same problem. I've never felt more skepticism for some pro-Israel coverage and virtually all anti-Israel coverage. Like it's not a symmetrical thing, right? Part of it is social media poisoning, right? It's just like there's so much dishonesty and bad faith there. I also think, I mean, you follow European media much more closely than I do, but my impression is that European media has basically gone the way of Greta Thunberg, right? That it's so bought into a kind of groupthink about Israel that I simply do not trust it. I mean, there can only be so many stories that are so clearly in bad faith from the BBC before my response to anything I see breaking from the BBC is, well, that would be bad if it turns out to be true. That's how I see every BBC headline about Israel. I think one of the tells is if they repeatedly refer to the Gaza Health Ministry as if it were, the Mayo Clinic, just some sort of like respected medical establishment rather than an actual arm of Hamas. And also whether they issue corrections when they get stuff wrong. I mean, so much of the media is in this race to be wrong first, and nowhere is, I think, that more true than in coverage of things having to do with Israel.
This is a nice thing. Where you'll get really robust debate about Israeli policy, the Israeli media.
Yeah.
It's really encouraging and even invigorating and enlightening to read, including the Israeli conservative media or right-of-center media. You have real debate there, maybe more than over here. And certainly in this respect, as in others, it's a thriving democracy. And people in Israel are not shy about expressing their views about the government. Wait.
Jews have strong opinions. Jay Nordlinger, breaking news here. One of my peeves on this, I wonder what do you think about it? One of my peeves on this stuff is how routinely people talk about, for our entire adult lifetimes and probably longer, the Mideast crisis or the Middle East conflict. And that is only coded as something to do with Israel and its neighbors, when there have been wars, near genocidal, massacres of Arab on Arab violence throughout this entire last half century or more.
Yes.
And that's never referred to as the Middle East conflict. There is this sort of Jewish exceptionalism thing that says the problems in the Middle East are about the one Jewish country, and you get this erasure of the Syrian slaughtering people, things going on in Yemen, things, going on for decades in these various countries.
The Iran-Iraq War, for example.
Yeah. I mean, the Iran-Iraq War was one of the ugliest things in the last 100 years.
Civil war in Lebanon. And yes, that's quite true. So the Middle East conflict is a shorthand for the Arab-Israeli conflict, or the Israeli-Arab conflict, which has been going on since 1947, 1948. It's funny how David Price Jones makes this point. The Middle East and the Arab-Israeli conflict, it's very complicated, and yet simple in some ways. Really the same question has been on the table, the same question's been in the air since the late 1940s. Will the Arabs agree to coexist with the state of Israel or not? Will a two-state solution be accepted or not? Will the people or peoples of the region accept accede to peaceful coexistence or not. But you can almost write it on a Chinese fortune cookie slip.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can write big books, as Bernard Lewis and others have, but you can also say that. That's the ball game.
Yeah.
And there's sometimes what this line attributed to Golda Meir, and I believe she said it, is trite, but that doesn't mean it's not true. If they lay down their arms, we'll have peace tomorrow. If we lay down our arms, there'll be no Israel tomorrow.
Yeah. No, I think that's
Sounds like it ought not to be true, but I believe it is.
Yeah. I remember talking to one of my few conversations with Norman Podhoretz years ago, where he was saying, if the Palestinians had a Gandhian or Martin Luther King like movement of nonviolence, he says, the thing is, Israelis would just get out of their tanks and refuse to shoot.
Yeah.
And I think obviously there's, after decades more of terrorist attacks, maybe that's not as true as it once was, and the skepticism about whether it was sincere would be pretty strong. But I think at the core, that's basically true, still to this day.
And when it comes to leaders, who's willing to be Sadat, and who's willing to suffer the fate of Sadat?
Yeah.
Damn few volunteers, understandably.
All right, so let's move on to things domestic, the rank punditry portion of this podcast. So
I've been pretty rank myself so far, I'm afraid. But
so I'm kind of curious. So I haven't spent much of my career trying to give actual constructive advice to Democrats, for all the obvious reasons, I think. And I've now come to the conclusion that, first of all, because I have really no more rooting interest for the Republican Party to muster, and I've come to the conclusion that we're never going to have a healthy Republican Party so as long as we don't have a healthy Democratic Party. Like, you actually need virtuous competition between the parties, because if one party goes crazy, it gives permission to the other party to go crazy too. And so I think, I'll put it this way, I think there are Democratic Party has many, many, many problems. One of its core ones is, as people will say, anti-Trumpism isn't enough. And I think that's true. At the same time, I think that they have no muscle memory and no available scripts to rely on to deal with big government Republican Party. Donald Trump doesn't care about debt and deficits, doesn't care about spending too much, doesn't care about increasing subsidies and entitlements and protectionism. And in other words, it won't be the Moriarty to the Democratic Party's Sherlock Holmes. It won't be the Lex Luthor to their Superman. Donald Trump's Republican Party won't be the villain that these guys know how to argue against. And that leaves them without a theme to their pudding, as it were.
Yeah.
What would you tell the Democratic Party to do to get itself right with the median voter in the age of Trump?
Well, what's that phrase from Parliament? Is it speak for England or speak for Britain? Speak for England, I think. Speak for America. Speak for the rule of law. Speak for the Constitution, separation of powers, freedom of expression, so on and so forth, civil society, decency, independence of certain institutions, respect, a pluribus unum. Don't politicize the military. Don't hold campaign rallies with our military. Speak for basic core American values, ABCs. Back to the drawing board, just kindergarten lessons, elementary civics. We don't do that here. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. We don't do that in America. For God's sakes, we're a constitutional republic. We have no truck with Caesarism here. President doesn't put himself on a coin. We don't do that here. Just keep it very basic. May not be popular. I don't know. But that's my best advice in a nutshell.
Yeah, so I essentially agree with you. the problem, and this is again why I think the Democrats have a huge problem, is that the ideological and activist cadres, to use a fun old word, of the Democratic Party have very little idea how to do that. Like, if you've come out of an elite university utterly fluent in the language of intersectionality and, and Foucauldian, layers of oppression and settler colonial theory and all of these things, to then turn on a dime and write a Schoolhouse Rock kind of speech about how the Constitution is actually good and that America is the good guys and all that kind of stuff. I think you kind of have to replace a big chunk of the rank and file people who just do party work.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, maybe there are particular Democrats, like this gubernatorial candidate in Virginia. I don't know. I was thinking of a phrase the other day from 1976. It was a famous phrase, our bicentennial year, a government as good as its people. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Carter said we ought to have a government as good as its people. And he later titled a book that way. In a democracy, maybe your government is as good as the people. I don't know. People like me often say, look, this isn't who we are. Mm-hmm. Is that true? Is that true now? I don't know. I'm not a politician. I'm not seeking votes, so I can say this. I don't know. And someone said to me, a foreign friend, I can't remember who it was, how can the American people tolerate that? How can they put up with this? You're Americans, for God's sakes. And I remember what David Price Jones told me many years ago about the metric martyr. This was a guy in the UK, a greengrocer. I can't remember his name. Ryan something? But he offered his goods, prices of goods, in imperial measures or English measures or metric ones. The customer could have his choice. He was prosecuted for this, and I believe convicted because of EU requirements. We'll have to look this up. But I remember saying to David, these are British measures, pounds, ounces. How can the British people put up with this? And he said something like, would they? Do they still live here? I don't know.
So, I'll see your Jimmy Carter, we need a government as good as the people, with Joseph de Maistre's every people get the government they deserve.
Yeah.
And I go back and forth on this question because, I agree. Most of my life, I made the argument that people who were catastrophizing about incipient dictatorship and fascism didn't understand that the American people had this, that American exceptionalism is a real thing, and that American people have this dogmatic commitment to liberty and freedom and all these kinds of things.
I don't believe in a national DNA anymore. I don't.
I don't really either. I mean, let me put it this way. I would like to believe in the DNA thing again. I would like to believe that the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, followed by the pandemic, created a moment of temporary insanity for a lot of people, and that this too shall pass. A lot of social sciences says financial crises like the one we saw back then have long tails of populist blowback, and then you add in all the immigration stuff as well, and pandemics make people crazy. And we kind of had crazy politics in this country at other points in the past and got over it. But I just temporary can be very, very long, and it feels very long already to make me kind of doubt the DNA thing. And so we'll see.
I have a little spiel about DNA, and it involves Portugal and Scotland. Portugal was a world power. It was a big deal in the world. It bestrode the globe like a colossus, practically. Great swaths of the globe speak Portuguese. In South America and Africa and the Caribbean, Portugal became just, no offense, it's a pleasant little country clinging to the western edge of Europe that doesn't make a wave in the world. Fine. Scotland, how did this juggernaut, this, one of the great progenitors of civilization and culture, how to become sort of an alcoholic welfare state. I don't believe in national DNAs. And I think that we, the people here in America, are subject to the same ills as anyone else. The human material really doesn't change. We have a certain history, a certain mythos. All that needs to be strengthened. If I had one wish for the country, it might be the renewal of civic education. And yet, I've been quoting lately, here's another Frenchman, Renan, I think his name is Ernest Renan. A nation is a daily plebiscite. Sometimes that's translated, a nation is a daily referendum. Same as an individual, and he likens a nation to an individual. What do we think today? What do we want to be? What do we aspire to? What is our best self? And if we go astray, we can get back, nationally, personally, and so on. So those are my platitudes of the moment.
So since we're trading quotes and platitudes, my favorite quote for a while now, or one of them, has been from the literary critic Wayne Booth, who I quote him all the time on here, who said, I hope I don't mangle it too much, but something to the effect of, rhetoric is the art of probing what men believe they ought to believe.
Yes.
And I think rhetoric really matters. And so for instance, when you start talking about enemies within and how Americans are much more dangerous than North Koreans, or that North Korea or Iran or Russia, and they're a bigger threat to the country, you have there's a reasonable expectation that some people are actually going to believe you. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to get into the weeds on the whole, does language incite people? But one of my big frustrations with this moment is we have these arguments about whether words are violence, and you saw after Charlie Kirk's murder, a lot of right-wingers sort of embrace what were heretofore left-wing positions about, hate crimes and whatnot, or hate speech and all that kind of stuff. And what's strange to me is just that conversation is held completely distinct and separate from the rhetoric of the deed of this actual administration, which is actually literally doing things that you can offer a colorable defense of. You could say, well, he actually has the authority to do this, and he has the authority, and don't listen to Trump's bombast. What they're actually doing is much closer to the law, all that kind of stuff. But the President of the United States is supposed to take care that his actions won't be interpreted as a threat to the Republic and the Constitution. And instead, Trump's instincts are to sound like he's a bigger threat to the Constitution, bigger threat to the Republic, bigger threat to freedom than his actions actually say. It's like he wants to feed his base this stuff about how he actually is an autocrat, and he wants to freak out his opponents to make him think he's an autocrat, but he stays farther from the line in reality. And that kind of statesmanship as trolling is, I would argue, is as likely, if not more likely, to incite bad reactions from people, violence from people, than any criticism, posthumous criticism of Charlie Kirk or anything. And yet it's a completely separate conversation. It's like, what's Trump up to is this conversation, and rhetoric can incite violence, and it's that kind of conversation. And I see them as much, the Venn diagrams overlapping much more.
Yeah. Well, I said about the Middle East or the Arab-Israeli conflict that there was a fundamental question, peaceful coexistence or not. And I say something similar about Trump. The question really hasn't changed since the summer of 2015. Is he fit to be president mentally and morally or not? And tens of millions say he is, and tens of millions say he isn't, and that really hasn't budged in 11 years. Yeah. I think Andy Warhol said, art is what you can get away with. Sometimes that's attributed to Marshall McLuhan. We'll have to chase this down. But Trump is testing what he can get away with. Probing, pushing, can I do this? Can I do that? Can I just fire this person or that person? Can I remove my own appointed U.S. attorney to get another one to do my bidding? Bureau of Labor, all that stuff. And it turns out a president can do a lot. And I don't think that Donald Trump has a liberal democratic bone in his body. I
Hmm.
think all his instincts are authoritarian. And even if some people, if they agree with me, they say, oh, don't worry, Nordlinger, we have these guardrails. We can't do much because of our system. I don't know about those guardrails. More and more I've come to believe that they're not so much paper arrangements as human beings, flesh and blood. People like Mike Pence on January 6th, human guardrails, like the Secretary of State of Georgia or Stephen Richer in Arizona. People who can stand and do the right thing at the right time. And I think I always greatly, as a conservative, I greatly respected norms, customs, traditions, things that weren't written down but were right to do. I have even greater respect for them now.
Yeah, uh, we're in violent agreement on this, or non-violent agreement on this. This was the fundamental point of my last book, which is, uh,
I'd like to think your latest book, your most recent book.
But I was sort of riffing off of a line from Neil Gaiman about how gods die when people stop believing in them, that principles die when people stop believing them. Principles do not exist external to the human heart, right? They're not part of, we can talk Plato if you want,
They're
but like
implanted, right? They're inculcated.
right. But they like decency does not exist outside the realm of people willing to be decent. There's nothing Whiggish that enforces decency on people, and it requires adherence and faithfulness. Reagan's famous line about every generation is, in danger of becoming tyranny because there's love of freedom is not in our blood. You have to fight for it, and I think that that's right. I am curious. I'm sure we probably talked about this the last time you were on, because you and I and a handful of others from our 2 decades and plus at National Review and in this world, we watched a lot of people that we thought we knew well go a different direction than us. And I've been thinking about this a bunch lately. I used to think that the time for, because I thought this is what the social science said, that the sort of like, the golden age of science fiction is 16. The golden age for radicalization is like 16 to 26. It's something that happens to young people.
Young people are interested in Rand, we used to say, and then
right.
They outgrow it. But yeah,
right. And I'd say one of the single most surprising things in the last 10 years is the number of people our age and older who went with the flow and actually ultimately sort of believed the BS and self-radicalized. And I just didn't think that, it's funny. One of the reasons I was thinking about this is I was listening to the Rest is History podcast. I don't know if you've ever listened to it, but it's one of my favorite podcasts. And they did a special episode on Enoch Powell. And Powell was a complicated dude. But he really radicalized in old age. And then I start thinking about it. So did Pat Buchanan. Yeah. So did a lot of people that we knew. I don't know, like, it makes me wonder. So, like, in 10 years, when I'm in my mid-60s, is there a potential that I become some sort of, radical,
No.
person or not? Or like, am I immune to the virus?
No, I just find I've known you since you were in your early 20s, and I think you're here to stay.
But I mean, like, did it surprise you the degree to which people that you thought had sort of passed the age of glandular excitement could become so radicalized?
Yes, it's been an opportunity for learning, for education. And is this their their real selves or false selves? There's an interesting question about in vino veritas. I
Hmm.
was always a big believer, not a big believer, I was a believer in vino veritas. What people said when they were drunk, they meant. And
Hmm.
the inmost thoughts were coming out. And people have argued against that and say, no, it's a distorting thing. It's not their real selves. And I have, I don't know what to think, frankly. And there's this old expression that it's not that hard times or challenging times uh, uh, shape character, they reveal character. I don't really know. As Obama once said in a different context, that's above my pay grade. I think you have to do your best every day and talk about a platitude. Figure out what you believe, say it as calmly, plainly, and well as you can. Let the chips fall where they may. And there are true believing Trumpites, Buchananites, Orbanites. They are illiberals. Some of them are well-known academics. Think of Vermeule and the guy from Notre Dame. That's who they are. It's what they think. There have always been such people with us. Um, Liberal Democrats, with in a sense of backers of liberal democracy, are I think thinner on the ground than I once knew.
Hmm.
More and more, I'm convinced by this argument that liberalism is really an experiment, and that it's contra naturam. I've been quoting Ortega y Gasset lately. That's simply unnatural. It's amazing it ever lasts for a while. He said the most generous thing in the world, the noblest thing in the world, is when you're in the majority and you acknowledge the rights of minorities. I mean, it's not very natural. You have the power to shut someone up, and you don't use that power. Amazing. Just amazing. And, maybe you can deal with this, Jonah. Is authoritarianism the natural inclination of man? I do know that the people who are hottest for liberal rights, I would say civil rights, political rights, human rights, are those in minorities.
Hmm.
And, no one, I guess for the last several decades, has been hotter for free speech, especially on campus, than conservatives. Is that because the left has been in the saddle? Or is it because of a genuine belief in free speech? Cynical old Jay says maybe the former.
Hmm. Yeah. So on the free speech thing in particular, David French has convinced me of a pretty elemental fact about American politics when it comes to the First Amendment, is that there are really only like 2-3% of the population that is actually fully committed to free speech. 360 degrees, doesn't matter what political perspective you have, free speech is sacrosanct. And the thing is that those 2 to 3% of the people always have about 48% of the of the public on their side for any given controversy. So when there's a free speech thing that stifles the left, true believers have 48% of the half the country that is left on their side, and vice versa when it's something on the right. And so, like, for every Greg Lukianoff, at Fire, there's like 10,000 people who are trying to come up with why this is different, right?
Yes.
And
well put. Very well put.
And I think, and look, I've been writing about how I am more comfortable with certain kinds of censorship than the conventional wisdom for decades. I'm very much was sort of the Irving Kristol school on this, and not for political speech. I think political speech, the whole argument for protecting strippers and pornography or any of that kind of extreme stuff, is the argument that says, well, if you protect the stuff at the fringes, the stuff at the center will be even more safe, right? That's sort of like the NRA argument about we have to defend machine guns and bump stocks or whatever because that protects our core rights.
Yeah,
And I get the argument. It turns out not to be true, at least when it comes to speech. But the ox getting gored thing, I mean, like, I think, like, on college campuses, there is certain speech that I would argue, if I had my druthers, may, in a very Burkean way, that you have an absolute right to speech, but we also have an honor code here. And shouting "gas the Jews" violates this other thing that we value, and or hang the N-words or any of that kind of stuff. Like, sure, you have a right to say it. We're not going to refer you to the police, but we don't do that kind of thing here.
Great lesson of Bill Bennett. Or I first heard this phrase from him, that there's a difference between what you have a right to do and what's right to do, and let's make the distinction.
Yeah.
Tell you something I've been saying, and I've written it for a piece to be published at the Next Move in a couple of days, I think, but I've said it quite a bit. I've been writing about human rights for many, many years, and I find that relatively few people are for human rights across the board. They're for human rights for certain people. For example, when I wrote about human rights and their violation in Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, a lot of people liked that. The same people didn't like it so much when I wrote about the same issues concerning Saudi Arabia, Russia, Egypt, Turkey, so on. So free speech. Everyone's for free speech for himself and for his friends, allies, so on. But how about for other people? And I'm no purist, mind you. I like to think I'm a pretty good free speecher, but I'll give you a story involving the aforementioned David French. I was at a forum somewhere, and he'd given a little talk, not a little, I don't mean to disparage it, a good and brief talk about free speech on campus. And I came up to him afterward, just wanting to engage him, and said, David, I'm afraid I'm a bad civil libertarian because, frankly, I don't think there ought to be Nazi and communist groups on campus. I don't think they ought to be permitted. And he said, Jay, well, you're not a bad civil libertarian. You're not a civil libertarian at all. And I said kind of, ouch, ouch. But, I have to examine myself as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I mean about being a Burkean about this, is that I have all sorts of principles, but every principle can be taken to the point of diminishing returns or encroaching on another principle. Now, and I'm totally open to the argument that public universities are different than private universities, and you have to have different standards at one and versus the other and all that kind of stuff. But on your broader point, I think it is manifestly true that liberalism, let me put it this way, that the sort of codified, reified set of Enlightenment principles liberalism, the liberalism of philosophes and all that kind of stuff, is unnatural.
To its credit.
I mean, this is one of these things I think, again, this is...
A lot of things are natural and bad.
Yeah, and this is
screwing everything in sight, for example.
Read Steven Pinker's book about violence. I mean, rape in war was just normal for most of human history, and
is
yeah, and again, this is reprising some of the stuff from my book, but I'm always surprised at the degree to which professed and ardent Christians kind of forget that denying natural impulses, denying worldly things being corrupting to the soul, is a big part of Christian theology. And the degree to which the cult of authenticity, the sort of Rousseauian, Nietzschean, Freudian, Jungian, lots of those kinds of guys that say the highest, truest virtue is being true to yourself, is a real negation of Jewish and Christian theology. It's a real negation of the higher principles of
putting off the old man and putting on the new.
I always say the worst form of parenting, I've never heard a good parent say to their kid,
feels good, do it.
If it feels good, do it. Hey, look, you have to be true to yourself, so you go ahead and run with those scissors, right? That's not what parents do. Is the parents train their children to be less of the barbarians that they were born.
What does Huck Finn say? She's trying to civilize me. I'm not going to let her civilize me.
And I think that's the thing about Trump, right? I think there is a very left-wing thing about Trump that people think is right-wing, which is, or very right-wing thing that proves horseshoe theory, which is just simply that Trump is giving people permission to indulge some very human but very bad impulses about vengeance, about retribution, about punishing people they don't like, about celebrating greed and self-interest and cruelty. And there's something that's sort of, it's like loosening a too tight belt. It feels good for a lot of people to like be liberated that way.
Well, Lincoln was a pretty smart guy, and he knew something about leadership, and he said, I'll paraphrase him or I'll adapt him, you can appeal to the better angels of men's nature or the worse angels. What will a leader do? You can sort of, leaders, talented demagogues, can tip people in a very bad direction, these talented demagogues, and leadership counts more than I ever knew, more than I would like. Are you appealing to better angels or worse angels? And Donald Trump is a master, I'll give him this, at appealing to, at stoking, at calling forth worse angels. And Jonah, if I may, when you were speaking about that which is natural, that which is not, I couldn't help thinking one of my favorite lines of yours that people would sometimes say to you, why do you let your dog kill squirrels? And you'd say, well, could we talk about that word let? That's an interesting word.
Yeah, I mean,
how was Zoe, by the way? Hanging in there,
showing her age. Yeah,
okay.
I mean, she's got about 3 teeth. They had to pull the rest, and she's got a bit of a hunchback, but the heart is willing.
Yeah, good.
We try to keep news of her toothlessness away from the squirrels because they would seize the opportunity for some payback. Last thing, and then I got to hop, and I know you got to hop, and I don't want to abuse our time here. But you've written a lot about human rights. You wrote for us a while back about live golf and all this. There was this big hullabaloo that I found myself to be shockingly more nuanced than I would have predicted, which was there was a comedy festival in Saudi Arabia.
That's a funny line in itself.
It is. Do you remember there was an Albert Brooks movie like 15 years ago where Albert Brooks plays a comedian trying to bring comedy to the Muslim world, and it bombed in part because like he was so afraid in real life to actually try to bring comedy to the real Muslim world. The thing was about is most of it shot in India. You had
democracies could be, even problematic ones like India's, can be very useful to artists.
For sure. Yeah. So Dave Chappelle and a whole bunch of people spoke at this thing, or performed at this thing, and a bunch of comedians said this was outrageous and how dare you, like, this is blood money. I'm more torn about it. I can explain why, but I'm just kind of curious why, how you see it.
Well, I'm sort of sorry you asked me because I'm going to give an incredibly arrogant answer. I shouldn't give it because it's so arrogant, but I'll proceed. So people said to me in the first Trump term when Trump was just gushing over Kim Jong-un, just gushing what a great guy, how talented, and how the people of North Korea respected him so much. They really, stood up and stand at attention. And he was telling all these lies about Kim Jong-un and North Korea. And people said, why do you care so much? Oh, it's just diplomacy. He's trying to get along and prevent nuclear war. Jonah, forgive me. It's because I know so damn much about North Korea. And have spoken to so many of its defectors, escapees. I know it's happening in that gulag, in those concentration camps. I know about the degree of torture and degradation. It's just, I know so damn much about Saudi Arabia and its political prisoners. I've sat with their relatives, with their sisters and fathers and mothers and brothers, and the idea of taking the Saudi coin, maybe, frankly, maybe I'm a bad person to ask, just because of the work I've done. I know that sounds incredibly self-righteous.
No. I think that's fine, and that would have been basically the position I would have thought I would take. And
but
you're thinking more agree with it.
You're thinking more of a glasnost. That
well,
maybe this will hope.
First, I want to be clear. I wouldn't take the gig personally, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that.
Sure.
I wasn't asked, and I won't be asked. But
and Pete Davidson, I think whose dad was killed in the 9/11 attacks.
Yeah. So the reason for the nuance is that, first of all, a lot of these people made movies with, studios that have dealings with China, that have investments from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And this idea that, like, this is where we draw the line strikes me as convenient to a certain extent. Sort of bravery on the cheap in a lot of ways. At the same time, I think the distinction is, if you claim to have some higher moral status as a comedian, as someone who speaks truth to power, who calls out injustice and mocks the powerful and all that kind of stuff, and then you go take Saudi blood money, screw you, right? If you're just clown nose on performer who is being paid for a service, I'm less troubled by it, in part because Saudi Arabia is getting better. It's still bad, right? But it is getting better. Like, what's his name? David Cross, who was criticizing it, was saying how they cane women, for wearing bad clothes or whatever it is. They banned caning of women in 2020. That's progress. MBS, I'm not saying he's the Saudi Ataturk, but like, directionally, Saudi Arabia is getting better. And meanwhile, you have people who think it's just the height of sophistication to deal with China, which I think is an apartheid country that is,
it's a genocidal country.
Yeah, every bit as bad, if not worse, than Saudi Arabia. And the trend lines in China are going the wrong way. The trend lines in Saudi Arabia are going the right way. So I was more conflicted about it than I thought I would be.
No, I get you. Do you remember? You might have been a little young. Do you remember "Ain't Gonna Play Sun City"?
Oh yeah. I've been thinking about that a lot during all of this.
Yeah. And what was the right thing to do, or not do, when it came to apartheid South Africa? Yeah, it's just it's a monstrous regime, the Saudi dictatorship. I should quote him anonymously, a U.S. Middle East policymaker. It's a monarchy with kings and queens and princes and princesses. Give me a break. It's just dictatorship. I don't care what they call it. It's just a nasty police state, no matter what the nomenclature. But there are a lot of those about. And I don't know. I think this really is a matter of conscience. Honestly, I'm not sure I would have said. I believe Dave Chappelle said that he could speak more openly in Saudi,
that's garbage.
And I'm sure the Saudi government appreciated hearing that.
Yeah, and signing a contract that says you agree to in no way disparage the Saudi government or the country of Saudi Arabia. The hypocrisy of signing that for your bag of geld is not Saudi geld.
With this line drawing, where do you draw it? There have been very big paydays for pop stars who have sung at the birthday parties of dictators and their sons and so on. It's usually sons, never daughters. I've written a fair amount about that. And how about that? You jet in, you sing for 45 minutes, $2 million, you jet home.
Yeah.
It hasn't come up in my life personally.
Yeah. Particularly if you're already really rich. I mean, that's one of the things that really bothers me is it's expensive to have principles when you're not rich, in a way that, I mean, our stances on all this, this is not a self-pitying thing, but like, it would have been more lucrative for us if we had gotten aboard the Trump train.
Oh my gosh.
And that's one of the things that always baffles me is people who have, we don't have time to get into it, but like, Megyn Kelly, right? Some of the things that she's indulging these days, when she's got to be worth high tens of millions of dollars. It's just like, what's it? It shows me that there's a currency out there other than money that people care about.
You remember that when the South Park guys reacted hysterically and sharply to what Trump was doing, with, I guess, was it Colbert or Kimmel? I get all this mixed up. And in that instance, I quoted Kevin Williamson, who says, what's the point of having FU money if you're never willing to say FU? And the South Park guys said they have that kind of money, and they also said it.
Yeah.
Which is kind of neat.
Yeah, I agree. Entirely. And on that note, I got to get out of here. I got someone coming over to check out my podcast setup. I don't know why, but anyway.
Well, thank you for being Jonah Goldberg. I appreciate it.
Thank you for being Jay Nordlinger, and we'll put all the links in the show notes to all your stuff, and I hope you'll come back. And congratulations on the capstone of your entire career of becoming contributor to the Dispatch.
Thank you. Thanks a million.